Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is if you have your sun in Scorpio and your moon in Pisces. You will not believe how many times I started this video over again. I actually did like a 35-minute video and I'm scrapping it. It is the most bizarre thing for whatever reason. And this was requested, as have been, I think, all of my recent videos with the sun-moon combinations. And a lot of them are with either the sun or the moon or both in water signs. And I think the reason for this is because people who have water in such a prominent place are seeking to understand themselves better. You know, water is connected to emotions, and emotions to me are very irrational. I said this in a prior video and somebody got triggered, and maybe it is a bit disrespectful to talk about things that way. I have a moon in Virgo, so it's not emotional in and of itself. I think that I exhibit strong emotions internally, but not necessarily am oriented that way. For me, I don't have any personal planets in water. My rising sign either is not water. So I'm mostly, I figured out the reason I'm emotional is because I have a conjunction between the moon and Pluto. So it's scorpionic, and my sun is in the 8th house. Just things like that. Chiron contacts, hard angles to Chiron. So it's my own version, but there's a detachment there. So anyway, this is obviously double water, and so it's very emotional. I knew somebody with this combination who was very kind-hearted, and this person exhibited more of the Piscean, influence than the Scorpio. So it's my feeling that maybe they had the sun in the 12th house or something like that, and it was more, or the 9th house, and it was more gregarious, or it was more compassionate. Not to say that Scorpio isn't compassionate, but Scorpio can be very hard-ass for the water signs. And probably because the two planets that rule your sun are Mars and Pluto. So they are hardly warm and fuzzy. And this can indicate that you have experienced a lot in your life. Actually, this combination can be like an old soul. And because of that, and because Scorpio is in the sun sign, you may have adopted this, it's not even like a persona, but this philosophy in life that you are a survivor, that you've got to pull up your big girl panties or big boy undies and deal with things, and there's a very tough aspect to Scorpio as a sun sign. If you had the moon sign, it might be a little bit different, but it's going to make you more compassionate in an overt way, having the moon in Pisces for sure, because what I have read and what I have experienced is that Scorpio is not, as a sun sign, or just in general, is intolerant to a large degree when it comes to weakness. And so typically, if somebody is a Scorpio and they are dealing with another person who may be very vulnerable, they may actually have a disdain for that person to some degree. But with the moon in Pisces, it can make them much more compassionate. And I think that's a good thing, actually, because it can be like a saving grace rather than being very closed off to other people's suffering. And also, this combination is going to be very intuitive, very geared towards anything that, towards a kind of career that involves psychology. It's actually very good for that. However, you might not, it might not rub off on you the right way because you're so empathic that you can absorb other people's problems way too easily. So it's one of those things where you're drawn to therapy, trying to help other people, but you may get burned out from it. And, it goes without saying anything like being an astrologer, a psychic, a healer of some sort. You always have to take care that you're not absorbing other people's pain. And in terms of personal relationships, this can be the Scorpio who tends to get involved in problematic relationships because of that moon in Pisces. That moon in Pisces can really trip people up because they have a compassionate nature, and it's also non-judgmental. It's very open. Neptune is a ruler of Pisces, and there's no boundaries with Neptune. It's very foggy, and that means that the boundaries between you and others can be non-existent. And by the way, even raising children, I've noticed, and I don't know if this is just the people that I've observed or if this is commonplace, is that even Scorpio sometimes can be laissez-faire with children. I always would think that Scorpio would be very authoritarian, but it doesn't necessarily work out this way. Scorpio is a very inscrutable sign in a lot of ways. There's a lot of, to me, it's kind of contradictory where a Scorpio person may be very hard to understand in how they feel about things and how they go about things. And this is because Scorpio it's like a very extreme kind of sign, and you either like people or you don't. There's not like a lot of middle ground. Now, because you have the moon in Pisces, this can be a little bit moderated, I guess, and you can have more of an open nature. But I think that can still come about where you have very pronounced opinions on things and likes and dislikes. Water signs can be prejudiced, and especially Scorpio. And I'm not talking about racism. People just automatically go to racism. It can be if somebody's had a bad experience with somebody of a different race or ethnicity, they may overgeneralize. Everybody from that group is bad. But it can be that, but doesn't have to be that. It can even be their own race, that their race is bad. It can be gender. It can be anything. But what I'm saying is it can be specific to experiences that you've had that have been negative, and that you crystallize your emotions. So they're kind of like, or fossilized, and it's hard for you to sway your emotions. Now, the moon in Pisces will modify this to some degree, and you might be more forgiving and that sort of thing, but it can also throw things off in a big way, in a bizarre way, because one of the things that I've observed with the moon in Pisces, and it's very aggravating for me because I know it's coming from a very subjective place, is that the person can be, it's almost like they trust their abuser more than they trust people who care for them in a way that has nothing to do with trying to get something from them. And when I say abuser, it can be a user type of person. So for instance, if they're being taken advantage of by somebody, they may actually trust that person more than they trust somebody who doesn't have that kind of an agenda. And I don't know if a sun in Scorpio would do this necessarily, combined with that moon in Pisces, but it is possible, especially if the sun is afflicted with Neptune or the moon is afflicted with Neptune, and it just is totally delusional. A lot of Neptune contacts, even positive ones, sometimes can be challenging because of the nature of Neptune, and it can in the best possible way, can lend itself to being overly idealistic when it comes to other people in relationships. In the worst case scenario, it can just be living in an alternative universe where you are refusing to see the truth about another person and projecting some kind of a fantasy onto that person. And yes, I think that even somebody with the sun in Scorpio is capable of this. If they have gone through a lot of trauma in their chart, if their sun is in the 12th house, if they have a conjunction or maybe a square opposition between the sun and Neptune, there's different things, Venus square Neptune, where the person is needing something to be true. And but it if the person is balanced, if the Scorpio is balanced, they can simply be somebody who is great at helping others to heal psychologically and being able to not project onto the other person or to get too caught up in the other person's issues, the client's issues. Because that's one of the things, if you feel drawn to therapy, or like if you're an astrologer or in a healing arts profession where you're dealing like a life coach or something like that, and you're dealing with other people who are kind of telling you their problems, you have to be able to be very subjective. I mean, no, not subjective, very objective, where you don't put your own opinions or stuff on the other person. Now, we can express our own opinions, but we have to always frame it in that way. That's just my opinion, and I realize that there are different ways of doing things, but some people are very dictatorial about it. And it's almost like being controlling, and they just think there's one way of doing things. And that's where it can get tricky when you're dealing with another person, because you have like a very strong opinion on whatever the issue is. So the other thing that I wanted to say is I think this combination is the old soul. And I immediately thought of somebody who is famous, because I like to draw those connections with people who we might know, and then we can observe their behavior or how their life has gone. And it is Mackenzie Phillips. And some of you who are younger might not even know who the heck that is, but she was on a sitcom with Valerie Bertinelli in the late 70s the late 70s to early 80s, called One Day at a Time. I know they've made a remake, but this is the original. And she wrote an autobiography called High on Arrival, and I highly recommend it because it blew my mind. There were a lot of things that I did not know about what she had experienced growing up. I mean, she was about 15 years old or so when she began working on that show, and she was already a veteran with substance abuse at that point, and she actually got fired from the show because of her cocaine issues, and then on again, off again for some years to come. And some of you may have remembered when she divulged that she had experienced incest with her own father, and that was like a mind blower too. And these kinds of things led to people forming opinions on that, and as they tend to do. And those kinds of things really bother me because it's like nobody would say something like that if it wasn't true. But people say, well, why did she allow it to happen? She was an adult, and all this stuff. And it's sometimes people can't understand it because they can't put themselves in somebody else's shoes. You can put yourself in other people's shoes. And that's what would make you a good therapist or any kind of a healer. You're capable of doing that. But the reason that I bring up her is because that is a taboo subject. Even substance abuse is not something that people advertise. And yet that was something that was in the news. And a lot of people knew that she had been kicked off the show and all of that. So she went through a lot in her life. And I think that was one of the reasons why she seemed so worldly. What's the word? I don't know. Like when you're young and you just seem like an old soul, that kind of thing. For somebody her age, she seemed, like older. And her character was kind of like that as well. I'm sure they wrote it because of that. So just, some of you may have similar experiences. One of the things that can happen, depending on other factors, and you have to look at some of the inner planets that you have. You may have Mars in Scorpio as well as a sun sign, and that can really drive you to experience the depths, is it heights and the heights and depths of life. Even like if it involves, doing things that are self-destructive because you're trying to gain some kind of understanding. You may not even know that. I mean, I think of people who are heroin addicts or people who are, like on the street, or they just run away from home, or they drop out of society. People who have an extreme reaction to life, and they kind of live in an alternative way, sometimes because they have chosen a life of addiction. And I shouldn't say chose it. They may have fallen into it because of emotional pain, but there's always that quality, I think, with a Scorpio person, maybe inner planets in Scorpio like Mars, where the person wants to experience maybe even like the seedy underbelly of life. They don't want this like little cookie cutter life. They don't want this pristine life even. There's that gritty kind of a thing that Scorpio can be attracted to. So you have to, when you have this combination, and don't get it twisted, I'm not saying that this is your fate. I'm saying that you have to, especially, obviously if you're 50 years old, chances are you're not going to be drawn to this. But if, let's say you're listening to this and you're on the younger side, and you've always been drawn to dangerous situations, you've always been drawn to crisis situations. This can be because of how you grew up, and you just feel like comfortable when there are very intense things going on, and you might feel very uncomfortable If you're in a situation where everything is calm, everything is like, mellow and orderly and all that. So you have to kind of rewire your brain and rewire your nervous system to appreciate things that are calm and not see them as boring. I think that's where I'm going with that. And I'm not saying that all of you are in that situation, but if you find yourself being self-destructive, consider that that's what you're doing. That there's a method to your madness. You're trying to really, it's almost like an undercover reporter, investigative reporter who is trying to find out how the other half lives. And you might reject the neat little cookie cutter suburbia lifestyle. But you can do that. You can do those kinds of things without endangering yourself, without going down the rabbit hole. You can choose to live life on your own terms, but you have to guard against self-destruction. And sometimes this can come about because the moon in Pisces has a tendency towards pessimism and learned helplessness. And you may feel like life is like you're fated, your fate is sealed, and that there's nothing that you can personally do. So that's what I mean by learned helplessness. And while we can't control everything in life for sure, there are definitely a lot of things that we can control. We have a lot of choices every day that we can make. And you have to be able to appreciate that and not think that you're just completely at the mercy of life. Because Pisces can be the victim. And if you have been a literal victim, then, it is what it is. It's true. But you don't have to identify as a victim. You can acknowledge that you have been in that situation and not base your identity off of it. Because what happens when people do that is that they will find life experiences forming that really validate their sense of self in that victim role. They will find a vibrational match for that. And even if you don't believe in the law of attraction, I'm just saying, even on the practical level, people who identify as victims tend to find abusers because if somebody treats them badly the first time, they're not going to go, hey, wait a second. They're going to think, oh, okay, this feels familiar. I should be with this person because it feels so familiar, instead of, rejecting it right away and seeing it as a red flag. So I do think that the sun in Scorpio makes a person with the moon in Pisces stronger. But there still can be this conditioning, again, with the mother. If the mother has been this lost soul in some way, an addict, mentally ill, abused herself, it can really feel like that's going to happen to you, and it doesn't have to be that way. So be very careful about, trying to alter your consciousness with something or numb it out, is especially how this may play out with a double water sign person, because you might have these feelings that are so strong that it's very overwhelming, and that feels like relief to take something that's a numbing agent, but it doesn't really, solve the problem. And, what you can do is alchemize the situation, meaning you transform this sense of emotional intensity into a work of art, or especially creatively, that can be really amazing. Or transfer it into something spiritual where you are especially devotional types of religious practices and paths. So bhakti yoga is a type of yoga which is kind of like the equivalent of this isn't a really good example. Maybe, I don't know if they call it charismatic Christianity or born again Christians who develop a personal relationship with God. The bhakti yogi is in the emotions when it comes to how they approach spirituality. They just love the music that stirs the soul. The like I'm thinking of Sankirtan. If anybody has gone to a Hindu temple, sometimes they will have they will just dance, and they will praise God through their bhajans and all this stuff, the devotional music. And so what you're doing is you're channeling that the tough emotions into something that is very productive, that is, giving back to others. If not through your career, then volunteer work. That's really how to handle some of these strong emotions in a positive way. If you feel stuck, if you feel like you're always in abusive relationships, or if you have major trust issues, as a lot of Scorpio people do, you might consider therapy, especially, I would say, with somebody who really wants to talk about it. That to me is the best thing, because, or behavior modification, where there are actual techniques on how to interact with people in a way that you don't give away your power, but you are letting people in, because this combination can be very emotionally closed off, ironically, even though maybe people tell you their secrets like a priest, but then on the other hand, you're the one sitting there and you're keeping all of your secrets, your feelings inside, and even people close to you don't know half of what you're feeling. And that may make you feel safe and powerful, but ultimately it probably will leave you misunderstood, because people won't be able to understand what makes you tick. It's not easy to talk about things that have happened that have been traumatic in a person's life. It's not easy to just talk about that, even with people that you care about very deeply, because first of all, you don't want to relive it, and you also don't want people to see you as weak. You want people to think that you just have it all together, that you don't have fears, that you just are on top of it all. And being able to say, yeah, I'm hurting right now, and I'm thinking about something that happened to me. Can I tell you about what happened to me? And not like it being your story, the thing that you just keep repeating over and over again because you're looking for sympathy, but you're wanting to explain why you have such strong reactions sometimes. Then when you do that again, because we tend to get triggered sometimes in life, and we have certain emotional reactions that are, it's almost like a default way that we act. And that other person's going to be more supportive of you in spite of some of those behaviors, because they're going to know why it happened, and they're not going to take it personally. And that's another thing, other people can take things personally. If somebody has been sexually abused and they are very reticent to get physically intimate with their partner, that person can feel like, oh, he or she isn't attracted to me. And then they spin off into these feelings of negativity towards themselves. So by sharing some of why you're acting in a certain way with a person, you will make it easier for them. You'll bridge that gap. And that's what you're trying to do, because the truth is, irony is that Scorpio, whether it's the sun or the moon or Venus or even Mars, wants more than anything to merge with another person, wants that deep, soulful relationship, and not just romantic relationships. You might want that with your child. You might want that with a friend. You detest anything that's superficial, well, whether it's a conversation, whether it's a movie. You like deep things. And so in order to really have those types of relationships that are truly deep and soul stirring, you have to risk giving yourself away. So anyway, that's what I have for you. I hope that this resonated. If you would like a private reading, the link is below. I'm at RainaMoonAstrology.com. Take care. Bye.